Good day, Inderes TV viewers and listeners. Sampo published its third quarter results today. I'm interviewing Sampo's CFO, Knut Arne. Knut, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, and good to have you here again.
Thank you. Sampo's results were impressive as usual. Could you give us some highlights about the third quarter?
Yes, it was a solid set of results again. We have good underwriting performance in the Nordics. We have a solid result in our UK business Hastings, despite the challenging motor insurance market in the UK. Good results from our side. We have record solvency in Mandatum, strong balance sheet in other words. And also a little surprising to me, actually, given the financial market turbulence that we've had in the third quarter, Mandatum still had a positive net flow of funds to their business in the last quarter. And then, of course, what is good for all the businesses is that we benefit from higher rates, which will mean higher investment returns. And we've been able to reinvest some of our assets at the higher rates that we've seen over the last few months.
Usually when we think about the underwriting results, they exceed the expectation of the market. But I think today it was a bit less than market or the analyst consensus expected. So do you see other softness, or was it just maybe bigger accidents or something?
I would absolutely not call our results that we published today soft. They are very far from soft. They are solid. Then consensus from time to time are a little bit lower on some elements, a little bit higher on some elements. They are estimates. To report a combined ratio in If of just below 80 for the first 9 months, 81.6 for the third quarter, is not a soft result. That is almost record strong. Then what happens, which is difficult for analysts to get exactly right all the time, is that there are certain elements in a P&C business which are more volatile on a short-term basis. For example, large claims, which we had a few of in If in the third quarter. And on this very 3 months or 6 months basis, it's difficult to make exact elements on the level of large claims. And that was the main reason why consensus and If was a little bit lower than the solid result we reported.
So business as usual?
Very much business as usual.
The economy is clearly slowing. How could that affect property and casualty business? If we think about, do people want to buy that much insurance? Maybe they want to take more risk with their lives and with their cars and so on. And can you see that the frauds are going up at some point, or competition? Is that heating?
First of all, I think we sell products to our customers which are relevant for our customers in many parts of life and also many different type of economic climates. Then, of course, there are some effects from the economic environment we are in. We have a bit higher claims inflation that we have seen over the last few years. We're able to price for that. We already have some effects from slower growth in terms of lower car sales in the Nordics. Despite that, we still have good growth. And it's difficult to speculate about the future, but of course there are certain products where premium volumes, total premium volumes, will depend on economic activity. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we will have lower margins, because a lower economic activity will also mean lower claims and lower claims frequencies. So I'm not worried about the margins, but of course you could have some effects from the top line if you have lower growth in the society in general.
So it would mostly affect only the growth rate, which has been good at this point.
If you look at sort of different business cycles in the past, the effects on margins have been limited. One of the things that are sort of present in some markets is that fraud, for example, goes up if you have sort of a worse economic environment. That's not really what we see in the Nordic, where fraud in the first place is not a material issue of our bottom line.
And a question about mandatum. Sampo has stated previously or categorized mandatum as manage for value. Maybe you could tell audience what that means. And if we think that life business, it's not actually core business of the Sampo Group. So is it possible in the future to divest mandatum?
I wouldn't say that manage for value is sort of the total opposite of the core business when it comes to mandatum necessarily. But mandatum's business model is basically split in two, to make it simple. One part, which is a significant part of the economics of mandatum, the capital requirement, the result in terms of investment return, is actually a business in runoff. And it's been in runoff for 15, 16 years. And what you do with the runoff insurance business, you manage it for value. You're trying to sort of make good money when building it down, basically. So that part of mandatum, for me, it's mainly the reason why we call it managed for value. Then, of course, there's a new business in mandatum as well. We're building an asset management business. We have a good unit-linked business. The synergies of that business is limited, almost non-existing with the non-life business. So it makes sense for us to think about it also on that perspective as two different buckets. When all of this is said, we're of course very happy with owning mandatum. It's a business which takes, which have good benefits from the higher interest rate environment, also on this managed for value with business in runoff, the with profit business. And it's also a business with growth opportunity in the front book of the business.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but is mandatum managing all the assets of the whole Sampo Group as well, or do you do that asset managing through mandatum?
It's split basically in two. Mandatum is managing their own assets, sort of the assets of mandatum. And then they're managing a smaller part of the If business where there are overlap, basically euro investments on the fixed income side. Then If has an investment team which invests the rest of its money. Top has its own investment team, and in Hastings we have outsourced the mandate.
And a question about the excess capital. We talked about that a lot. What's the amount of excess capital right now at your balance sheet?
In our report today, we said that the excess capital was around 3 to 4 euros per share, which means that it's sort of around 2 billion or so with the number of shares that we have.
How do you take account the solvency when you calculate the excess capital? Because your solvency ratio has gone up.
The excess capital is very much linked to the solvency ratio and the capital management framework we have, where the solvency target is one part of it. We have a target range of 170 to 190. And if you take the solvency ratio that we reported today and adjust for the accrued dividend, sort of the dividend that sort of is based on the profit we reported for the first 9 months, you come to a solvency ratio a bit below 240%. And if you sort of relate that solvency ratio to the target range we have, you would basically get an excess capital of just the range I said, 3 to 4 euros. Then of course there are some elements in the solvency calculation which is a bit more volatile, which means that this isn't just an exact science where every percent up or down is changing our view on excess capital. That is not the case. But it's broadly in line with taking the solvency ratio we have after accrued dividend, because a normal dividend is not excess capital and related to the capital management framework, which we've had now for close to 2 years.
I think one part here is also the private equity investments. So how are they performing right now?
Yeah, as a part of that 3 to 4 euro, you're absolutely right. Part of our excess capital is tied up, you could say, in those investments, because we have said that those investments eventually will be sold. The private equity investments, the investment portfolio of Sampo PLC is doing okay. Obviously, as all investment portfolios, impacted somewhat by the current financial markets, meaning that we have made no exits during the last quarter, which have added to sort of or change the excess capital position we have talked about earlier. So basically, there's no news as we speak on that investment portfolio. That being said, we should remember that is a fairly small part of the balance sheet of Sampo.
True. Are you still aiming to distribute the excess capital to shareholders before when the strategy period ends? I think it was in the end of 2023.
Yes, that's right. That's 3 years since we sort of announced our targets. We have not linked our excess capital to that specific end of 23. What we have said is that we will come with more news on excess capital. Next step in that distribution, not least related to the Nordea proceeds, which we still have some left of, a bit more than 2 of that 3 to 4 euro range when we release our full year results in February.
Then the last question. You're planning a dual listing in Stockholm. How that should benefit the present shareholders of Sampo?
All shareholders benefit from having an increased demand in the stock they own or increased liquidity. In terms of the Swedish listing, what Sampo has for many years, I shouldn't say forever, but for as long as I can remember, had a very modest relative to sort of our exposure and relative to the size of the Swedish financial market, a very modest shareholder base in Sweden. And we've made some efforts, and will certainly continue to make some efforts to increase that compared to what we would find to be a natural level, given the footprint we have in Sweden, given the size of the Swedish financial market compared to other Nordic financial markets, and increase that shareholder base from this modest level, which we sort of historically have had. The Swedish listing is a tool to do that, because it makes it easier for Swedish investors to invest in a Swedish krona stock. And if we succeed, which is not happening on a certain date in the second half of this month, but it's a longer term project where we will continue to invest in IR activity in the Swedish market, but we have this availability of a Sampo stock, and succeed in increasing the interest amongst Swedish investors in our stock, that would of course benefit all our investors because of what I said in terms of increased demand and increased liquidity.
Exactly. Thanks, Knut, for the interview.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.